Hi everybody, hope you're all okay this week. Today we're going to be doing some watercolour practice. We're going to keep it really simple and we're just going to focus on mixing different shades of one colour just by using less or more water. I'm going to continue with the idea of creating distance like the last video I did when we did the charcoal trees, which if you've not seen you can also find on our YouTube channel or on a Twitter post last week. I think that's a really nice concept of trying to create distance in something that's two-dimensional. So we'll try that. We're going to go for a cityscape. You don't have to do this. You could continue and do a woodland, or you could do something like a landscape. I'm just going to keep this really simple using rectangles and squares to build up my city. Okay, let's get started. So, for those of you that haven't used watercolour before, I am going to make this really basic because it is they are quite tricky if you've not used them. So you need to wet your brush first of all. Put my water there so you can see. I've been practicing already. Wet my brush first of all, and then I'm going to dip my brush into the paint, so just choose whichever colour, and make a paste in that little tablet. I'll just do an example here. So you can see it's a really nice bright colour that first time you use it. If you add a little bit to make it lighter, a bit more water and drag it across. And a little bit more water, you can see how quickly the colour changes and becomes really light. So that's how we're going to create our city. We're going to make really light buildings in the background, medium buildings in the middle ground, and darker buildings in the foreground. Okay, so first of all, so I'm going to do one here. Start with, you wet your brush, a little bit of paint, and don't worry if it comes out a little bit dark to begin with, because, make sure you can see properly actually, there we go. Because you can always lighten it up by just adding a little bit of water to it. So that's quite light already, and a bit more paint on mine. Just spread it out. So try and make your buildings different shapes and sizes. There's a temptation to do them all the same size, but just try and mix it up a little bit. See, this is what I'm doing there. If you find that you get like puddles of water on your page, just pull that water and that paint into your next shape. I've barely gone to my water there to create that layer. I'm just going to bring the colour down a little bit. This is called a wash when you do this, when you're dragging and washing the paint across the page. And then I'm ready to do my next layer of colour. So this time I need more paint, so I'm not going to go back to the water as much. When you do this, I recommend that you leave this layer to dry, so that when you add your next layer, the building shapes are really crisp. You'll notice when I do it, the colour will sort of bleed into the other colour. That means it will spill over and mix with the shapes underneath, and that's because it's not dry. But it still works, but I don't have as much time as you. Make sure that that layer is darker. You might find that the colours start to look similar and you start to lose the darkness, so just go over those shapes a bit, and don't be afraid to overlap the buildings that are behind. That's what a cityscape looks like. The buildings are all overlapped and stacked on top of each other, so don't worry about that at all. Something that's gone really dark, Lacey, so I'm going to use that paint to drag into my other shapes to make it less dark, because you need to make sure that you can go darker for your next layer. Okay, so that's my middle ground, and again I'm just going to bring the colour down a little bit like that, with a wash. And then my third and final layer, I'm going to need lots more, and I want this to be really dark, so I need lots more colour. Now here I'm going to struggle slightly because my paint is, the paper is wet underneath, but when you do it, just leave that layer to dry and it'll be a lot easier. Okay, and these buildings are going to be, and what you might need to do is just go over them a couple of times. If it starts to lose, if you start to lose the shape, don't worry, just keep going. Like the shapes of your buildings, if they start to blend in with the shapes behind, don't worry about it, just keep pushing on to the end, because by the time you get to the end of the page, they've probably dried slightly. Watercolours dry so fast, so by the time you get to your final shapes, they'll probably be slightly dry or drying, and then you can just go over the top. See here, coming together. So now I'm just going to go over some of my shapes and make them a little bit darker if I need to, and make them a little bit crisper if I can, because mine obviously, I might add a little triangle to one of these just to make it look a little bit different from the buildings behind it. Now this is where it was really wet, so I'm just going to get a bit more paint and just make those lines look a little bit, stand out a little bit more, look a bit neater. Another building in there. Okay, and then I'm just going to drag my paint down again. Now I could even do another layer there if I wanted to. I'm not gonna because of time, but I won't be able to go much darker than that blue, but what I could do is I could add a little tiny bit of black into it, and just over the top. See, I'll just show you now. If you add a tiny bit of black, it will darken the colour even more. So you could do another layer of darker buildings in right in the front of the picture here. But you need to leave those layers to dry first. Anyway, would love to see how it goes. Please share any pictures. Have a go at doing this, or doing it as a woodland or a landscape. If you don't have watercolours at home, I will post a link to a set like this, but if you don't have any, or have any means of getting them, you can just do this with any sort of paint. Just water it down. So you want your 3 different shades, so you'll know more water with one, medium amount of water, and less water for the darkest. You can also, if you have no paint in the house, do this with instant coffee, which sounds really strange, but actually you just need different strengths. You need a really weak one, that'll be your really light shade. You need a medium mix and like a stodgy thick mix, and that can be your foreground. Have an experiment. It actually works really, really well. Just make sure you leave those layers to dry. Okay, enjoy. See you soon.